Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to 1882 Foundation Talk Story. I hope that's the place you're wanting to come to today. But if you're not, you're in. But you stay anyway, but you're in for a good treat here today. We got a great program today. You know, the 1882 Foundation. We're located here in DC, and we've been holding talk story events monthly since about 2012. And we've always done them live. We're just starting to go back live again the last couple of months, and we're doing it hybrid. We're also hybrid online, so we have a lot of people online as well. But we're hoping to go back to where we were when we started, when we were doing them live, because we get so much good interchange there. But we're also getting good interchange online as well. So maybe we'll keep the hybrid going here, because it's getting a good audience. And we've been, coronavirus has sort of changed the way we do business, but we are still active. And we're streaming live on Facebook and recording. So if those of you who are online are uncomfortable with being on stage, so to speak, turn your camera off and just participate by listening in and participate, ask you questions on chat. As a matter of fact, on chat, go ahead and start conversing with each other right now and tell us where you're calling in from, and so we can get an idea of where our audience is from. So the audience will be muted during the presentations, but afterwards, during open discussion and question and answer period, you will have the opportunity to speak up if you raise your hand or put a question in the chat box. Our associates will be overseeing the chat box and the Q&As, and we'll make sure that they're addressed by our moderator and our participants during the program. So the 1882 Foundation is dedicated to promoting, uncovering, understanding, and sharing our American stories. As I said, Talk Story has been a regular feature here in DC AAPI community since 2012. This is a gathering of our community, our friends, our allies, to share stories of our lives, our heritage, history, hopes and ambitions, trials and tribulations. We found the strength of our community lies in the power of the stories we share with one another. We invite you to partner with us through your participation and support. Our website is 1882foundation.org, and you can find out more about our organization on that website. Some of our partners are OCA, Asian Pacific American Advocates, Chinese American Citizens Alliance, the DC Chinatown Service Center, and Smithsonian Center for Folk Life and Cultural Heritage. So today we're going to have the privilege of hearing another aspect of our stories, our community stories. And it's an aspect I think maybe deserves more attention. It's about the Chinese adoptees who have come to this country, in different ways from a lot of us that are migrated here, are immigrants here. And as the title of our presentation, their presentation infers, somewhere in between, I think that's what they're going to talk about today. What is like being in between, being Chinese, but also being brought here, maybe not being raised by your natural parents, but by being adopted and into a new world. And so that we have 4 young women here who are going to share their stories with us today. And I think we're going to find it fascinating. So, save your questions. You ought to have a lot of questions for them, because they've been undertaking a transition, and that a lot of us have not experienced. And I think it's going to be different from our stories, but still the same, an American story of our Asian American Pacific Islander communities. So Mia Owens is organized this along with 3 of her friends, 2 of which are here today, and one's remote. And I'll let Mia take over the program and introduce your co-presenters.
All right, well, thank you, Stan. Hi, everyone. My name is Mia Owens, and I am a program associate with the 1882 Foundation for, I think, almost 2 years now. And I'm really excited about this program and convening this personally as a Chinese adoptee. So I was adopted from China when I was about 10 months old from southern China in Beijing, and then grew up in Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama, and then moved up here a couple of years ago to go to grad school in history. But I am really happy to have these lovely ladies here today to join me in this conversation. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with Ren here.
Hi, I am Ren. I was adopted from China when I was 3 years old from Yangzhou, which is in Jiangsu province. It's about 2 hours away from Shanghai from train, so it's East Coast. I've grown up in Maryland most of my life, and I'm finishing up a bachelor's degree at University of Maryland in studio arts.
And then we also have Lina here.
Hi, my name is Lina. I'm Ren's sister, and I was adopted at 13 months. I'm from Wuxi, which is also part of Jiangsu province. I think I've covered most of it, but I'm graduating from the Extension School at Harvard University at the end of this summer, and then we'll pursue an MSW after that.
Yeah, so both Ren and Lina have been kind of involved with 1882 project, or been joining 1882 stuff, you know, for a couple of years now. So I'm really excited to pull them into this conversation. And our final panelist is actually, you'll see your little Zoom box up there. Mimi, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I am Mimi, and I was adopted from Nanchang when I was 10 months old, which is the same province that Mia is from. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and I've known Mia for most of my life. Still lived in Birmingham for most of my life, too, and I'm about to graduate from medical school there and start residency in neurology.
Right, yeah. So everyone, thank you for joining us today, both an audience here in person as well as our Zoom audience online. We're really excited to have this conversation where we're going to talk about, you know, kind of where we grew up, our families, and our experiences, like thinking about identity as Chinese Americans. So this is going to be kind of a guided conversation, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A at the end. So we'll take questions both from the audience here as well as audience over Zoom if anyone has any. So the first kind of topic that I wanted to talk about was, of course, adoption, first of all. And so I think the first thing I want to talk about was maybe have all of us give a little bit of a description about like our experience with adoption, both kind of at the beginning process of like coming to the United States, as well as, I guess, like anything else you want to add. Ren, would you like to start off? I'll pass the baton to you.
Sure, I'd love to. I don't know too much about other people's adoptions, but I think I know enough where my adoption was a bit different than the normal. In my situation, one of my moms was able to look at some photos and kind of pick out the one she wanted, because this adoption group went to China, the orphanage that I was in, and took photos and videos and then brought them back. From what I've heard, a lot of times it's a group goes and then they come out with the child and kind of, here you go, here you go, here you go. But in this situation, both my parents were able to pick out me from a photo, and same with my sister, because she was adopted first, even though I'm older by law, so we get to confuse people. But I don't remember much, even though I was about 3. I wish I did, but I do remember hearing all these stories about the adoption process. It's very interesting. I have videos of me in the orphanage, but also videos of when I first got off the plane and met my other mom and my sister and the rest of my family for the first.
And Lina, you're welcome to add on to that.
Well, I mean, I think I would describe like my relationship with my adoption as like an ebb and a flow roller coaster. It's not always the same. And I think as a child, it was deeply distressing to me. I don't talk a lot about it with people that, you know, are my friends or anything like that. But I think like trying to conceptualize as a child that, you know, your birth parents, which is what we call, you know, the parents that birthed us, you know, don't want you is kind of this this thing that you have to reconcile at such a young age. And even though, and it's not, there's nothing about that statement that has to do with the parents that raise you. It's so much about, you know, in our society, we're taught that, you know, your parents are there to protect you. And so to have that kind of juxtaposition in your life is a hard thing at such a young age.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of adoptees resonate with. I'm gonna let MeMe, do you want to go ahead and talk about, I guess, your adoption too, and then I'll share my story next.
Sure. Yeah. So that's really a good point. So my adoption, there's a little bit of an echo, so I can hear myself talking. My adoption was, for me, a pretty joyous thing. My mother was a single mom who adopted me, but I grew up with her and my grandparents. So my grandmother went with my mother to China to adopt me, and they were really joyful about that. And then they brought me home to my grandfather. So I have two, what we call gotcha days, which I know we'll probably get into talking about that later. So for me, I've always been very open about my adoption. It's been a good thing. I've been very accepting of it, but as I've gotten older and I've learned more about the adoptee community, I do understand that there is some trauma that a lot of us have experienced, and we kind of cope with it different ways. And as I've gotten older, I started reflecting on that myself. But overall, it's been a good thing in my life, just a lot of complexities, I think.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about also goes into something we're going to talk about a little bit later about the idea of like adoption being like a lucky thing or like a blessing, but it can be both of those things. It also is like a little bit more complicated than that for some people. For me, when I was adopted, I actually have two sisters who were also adopted from China, both from the same orphanage. And so it was kind of cool to grow up and have a family of, I guess, adopted sisters, as well as MeMe, who I also kind of consider to be a sister as well, since we grew up together. But yeah, I'd say that overall my experience has been pretty positive. Growing up the South is something that we'll talk about later too, but it has its own set of kind of challenges and interesting things. But overall, yeah, it's been, I think I've become to reconcile with it for sure after, 25 years of thinking about it. I think the kind of next topic I want to go into is this idea that I know you talked about a lot offline, was this idea of there are different kinds of adoption. So there's like both open and closed adoption. I know, Lina, you've done a lot of research with it. I was wondering if you'd be willing to kind of talk about the different kinds of adoption that we see with different families.
I mean, so international adds a different aspect, of course. You're taking a child and especially between, China and the United States, taking a child and moving them into a place that's a completely different language, completely different culture. You have to sit on a plane for 12 hours and do that as well. But yeah, open and closed adoption, all Chinese adoptions are closed just because of the ties to the one-child policy. So that just means that you have no information about anything related to your birth family. And usually the orphanage, if they do, they're not going to share that with you. And that can happen in the United States too. But more frequently, I think within adoption within the same country, is you have the option to decide what kind of adoption you want. And so an open adoption would mean you would decide before the child is born or adopted, kind of what contact would look like between the birth family and the adoptive family. So it allows more kind of a conversation and communication between the birth family or the birth parents and the adoptee and the adoptive family versus a closed adoption where you kind of are left to wonder.
Thank you for explaining that. And I know that after like talking to both of you and talking to MeMe, there's also been like the idea of like, going back to China and trying to figure out, either visiting the orphanage or trying to find kind of a sense of like who your birth parents were or things like that. I was wondering, I know Ren, you mentioned actually going back to China, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that experience of going back. And I know I don't think you said you went to your orphanage per se, but what was that kind of like in your journey?
Yes, that was very emotional for me. I think when I was younger, I didn't focus as much on that. I was really focused on acclimating. I mean, there's videos when I got off the plane where I meet Lina and she's, speaking English, and I'm just kind of looking kind of blank face. So I was learning how to speak English at 3. So for me, I started to really want to pursue my identity, my history, my being adopted more at the start of beginning of high school, I would say. So my first trip back was in 2013 with one of my moms. And it was very eye-opening. There's a book on the table, the yellow one that's standing up, that was from the trip. We did this 1 week long kind of cultural immersion with, I think the Chinese government had run it. So I did that, and then I also went back to my hometown where the orphanage was in Yangzhou and did an orphanage visit. That was very emotional. Some of the photos from the orphanage still looked the same, but a lot of the interiors had been redone. But they welcomed us back and they did a banquet. And I mean, they were very happy to see me return. I think they had this whole wall there of just photos of the baby portraits of the orphans that had gone through. And so when you return, they give you stickers and you put it on your photo to kind of commemorate your return. So I remember having extremely mixed feelings, but I was glad I went personally, but I know everyone has different ways of coping or deciding whether they want to even explore that area or not.
Yeah, that's very true. And I haven't personally been able to go back to China at all. I know that's something that my family has like talked about in the past, going back with like me and my sisters. And then I have a younger brother also who is of my adopted parents. But it sounds like I don't know how I'd feel personally about doing it too. I think it'd be a very emotional thing for me as well.
It's mixed because a lot of times they see you there as just being Asian, but then they look at me and I can't respond to them. You know, my mom's doesn't know, Chinese either, so we're both kind of stuck and they're confused, like, you're Chinese but you don't speak. What's the dealio? And I have to explain my broken Chinese. It's interesting. Definitely feels somewhere in between. You don't really fit into either.
For sure. Yeah, it's the title of our program.
Exactly.
I think that I want to move on to our next topic now, where we're going to kind of focus on talking about, I guess, family. So I know that you both have kind of mentioned it already, but would you be willing to share a little bit more about kind of what your family situation looks like, both as far as like siblings go, as like external family, or whatever family means to you, I guess. I don't know, Lina, would you like to start next?
Well, so Renzi and I are 4 months apart, or Ren are 4 months apart. And so we essentially were raised as twins in the sense that we were in the same school, same grade. We were in school pre-primary all the way to 12th grade. We were at the same, we moved school, but we remained at the same school together. And we are raised by 2 white parents that are lesbian. So that adds a level of complexity there. And so we would be considered international adoptees, but also racial adoptees, which just means that our parents are not the same race that we are. And typically it means that the adoptee is part of a minority race and the adoptive family is a majority race, which I think also plays an interesting role in the family dynamics.
Anything you want to add to that, Ren?
Our extended family are in Wisconsin and Michigan. So that's always been interesting growing up, especially the Wisconsin part in this small town. At least I felt like I would be stared at here and there out of confusion. But I didn't mind too much.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I think there's an aspect of not looking like anybody in our family really makes an impact. And like my sister and I were both fortunate that we not only had each other, but also had each other in terms of like we grew up in the same family. There's definitely times where I've been to adoption groups and they have straight parents, or they know more about their birth story or whatever. And so it's still, even within adoption groups, at least for me, I have felt like it's not, I still feel in between in those groups as well.
Yeah. Mimi, would you like to talk about your family dynamic as well?
Sure. Yeah, so it sounds like you guys have maybe hung out with your extended family a little bit more than I have. Unfortunately, my extended family, it's not that big, but we're not very close. I actually do have one cousin who is a distant cousin who's also adopted from China, but we just had never been very close. We're very different people. And I think she may have had some trauma with her adoption and dealing with it. So, but my immediate family, which like I said, are my grandparents, my mom, we've all been very close. But unfortunately, my mother passed away a few years ago from a brain tumor. So I don't have a big immediate family. So for me, and I think part of this is being adopted, the fact that I'm not biologically related to anyone by blood. But for me, family are the people that you choose. And so, I'm very close to like my grandmother, and I'm very close to friends I consider to be family. I have a friend that, I call my brother. Mia's, like a little sister to me. So that's kind of how I view family, a little bit different.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think growing up, it was always nice to have a Mimi around because we would play with each other a lot as kids and have, I feel like, pretty consistently kept up with each other, even through all the ups and downs of, college and all of that and moving and stuff like that. But yeah, I definitely consider Mimi as part of my family. I think that idea of family does get kind of a little bit, I feel like it kind of expands a little bit as an adoptee, at least for me, having conversations with other people. Um, it's like I feel like it's already like onto that kind of fluid. But for me, I think, yeah, like I mentioned before, having like two other sisters, um, I feel like we didn't really talk that much about adoption growing up. It was something that I think my family like did a point of like making sure we understood that we were adopted and like what kind that meant and all of that. So it wasn't like a surprise or anything. So I think that was kind of nice. I mean, obviously my parents are also, or my adopted parents are both white also. So it's kind of obvious when people look at you and they kind of know already. Um, but yeah, my sisters and I didn't really talk about it much growing up. And I think now that we're older, we talk about it a bit more. Like I know, I don't want to speak too much to their experience, but I think we've each found like a little bit of a different way to connect with like our adoption. And then sometimes we'll like kind of connect in that way by talking through that. So it's more like an indirect type of thing than anything else. Let's see. I think those are kind of all the questions I had about family. Is there anything else that you guys want to comment on when it comes to like your family or anything you want to express as far as like families and adoption look like?
I guess I would say there are definitely families that will adopt within the same race. And so that is more of your choice. And in some adoption groups, they will talk about how you share whether you're adopted or not. But between you not looking like your parents and my sister and I were always in the same class and we were the same age and we weren't twins. And how is that possible? And it's possible because we're standing here. But anyways, how rude. But yeah, it was one of the first things that would always come out about us. And it was something, I mean, I definitely did not speak beyond that. People just knew that we were adopted, but it was one of those things that there was really no option otherwise, like people were gonna know. And so that does play a factor in like how you get to be a part of your own narrative and have control of that or not.
It's very true. Yeah, I think that really moves very well into our next kind of topic of community, which is obviously can be different depending on where you grow up. Since you guys grew up kind of in this area, Mimi and I are both in Alabama. I know that kind of in our pre-conversations, we talked a bit about like how the different kind of community shapes also kind of how you like interact with that sense of identity. So I wonder, I guess we'll start with Mimi. Would you like to kind of talk about, I guess, like our community growing up? We didn't go to the same school or anything, but we did grow up in the same area, but kind of different senses of community based on our upbringing. So, Mimi, would you like to take the lead on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think the idea of community for us is kind of interesting because I feel like you have two parts of it. The fact that, like Mia said, she went to a different school where there are a lot of, I think compared to my school at least, a lot of Asian American students. But my school was a small private school and there was almost zero diversity. I think there was one other girl adopted from China and then me, and everybody else was pretty much white for the most part. So that was different. But for me, I went to a very small school. So I think everyone knew who I was and knew that I was adopted. So I didn't really, I think it was well intentioned, but kind of color blindness, I think is how I dealt with that part of my community. But then in terms of an Asian American community or a Chinese community, Mia and I were part of a group that Mia, you can refresh my memory, but I think it was a group of people and parents who had adopted from China and they would meet occasionally, to kind of have that sense of community, but it kind of died out after a while. So we didn't have that. And my family was always very open about, you're adopted from China, and that's like a wonderful thing. We want to celebrate it. But there just wasn't, at least that we knew how to get access to, like a big Chinese community here in Birmingham. I know it exists in a way because the medical school that I go to, which is UAB, is actually a really big hospital, and it draws a lot of diversity from around the world. So I know that that community exists, but I just felt like we didn't really have a way to access it. So I feel that I grew up and then like technically accepting community, but it was just very colorblind, which brings up a lot of interesting things I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, I agree with like a lot of what you said too. Yeah, like Mimi said, I honestly kind of remember that group. I don't really fully remember it. I remember there was one other adoptee I think that I kind of grew up with, who I think since then our friendship kind of waned after that. But there was kind of like a little, I think since like in the area, a lot of people end up adopting kind of based on like their connections to like churches or like things like that. There was like kind of a adoptee community, but I don't think it lasted much longer after kind of that wave of adoption in like our area. And then for me growing up, I went to public school, and there was like another kind of like Chinese community there, but I never felt like I really belonged in that kind of sense. Like I didn't have the same experience as them culturally. I didn't know like they would speak like, the blend of like Chinese and English like sometimes to each other. I couldn't really relate to that at all because I just know English. So that part I kind of felt like I couldn't really relate to them as much because I wasn't in the same like cultural circles as far as like what they did. And like I think they also had like a Chinese church that they like all kind of met at and like formed a community with, and didn't really feel like that sense of belonging there. But I think it's something that even though like I didn't really feel that like in Birmingham, it like kind of, I don't know, made me kind of question like the idea of community a bit more, and like what kind of I was like looking from it, and like kind of things like that. But I want to give you guys the floor to talk about your experiences with like community, both I guess like, the adoptee community as well as like Chinese American or Asian community in this area.
I can go first. If I just the look is like, I mean, I think we have very different experiences, even though we grew up in the same home and all of that. I think that I did not find comfort in adoption groups at all. It was just, I just felt there wasn't enough. There were too many other moving parts, and there were too many other things that I just didn't relate to, and I didn't want to sit around and like talk about all of that. But I think growing up here, Renzi and I didn't realize, I think we have it in hindsight, but it realized we went to private school, and the first private school that we went to, we had a very unique experience where there were multiple families that had 2 white moms and 2 adopted Chinese girls. And that it was a super special thing for us to have. And so and not everyone graduated, but to have that when you were younger and not be the exception to the rule or not stick out as much, but to have, 5, 6, 10 families that looked like you, it made it, it normalized it in a way that I think we didn't realize until we went to our next school, the importance of that. And then we shifted in 7th grade, which is a hard time to shift in middle school. You don't want to stick out, and there's a lot of sticking out just generally in middle school. And then you add, adopted and don't look like your parents, and your parents are lesbian, and it's just a journey. So I think that there were just kind of so many moving pieces, but I think that to be able to have that foundation was really special for us. And then my parents made a big effort, including Asian customs and holidays. So we celebrated those holidays, which was really cool. And we had a group of people that we would see, I think, on a monthly basis, which again were 2 white moms and 2 Chinese adoptees, which was really special for us.
I know that from past conversations, I know Mimi and I grew up saying it was Gotcha Day, but there's a better word for it that you guys grew up with. What was it?
We just called it our adoption
Day. That makes sense. But yeah, could you guys talk about a little bit about how that kind of became like an important part of, I guess, like your experience? I mean, for some adoptees, it's like another birthday in a sense, but can you guys talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, it's celebrating kind of the completion of the family almost, it's optional. I know adoptees that do celebrate it regularly and adoptees that don't. But we always had, and it included stuff like watching home videos when you were younger, or in my case, videos that were taken at the orphanage. We would often light candles for our birth parents while celebrating, and just spend time with the family, look at photos too, we still have some clothes from the orphanage that we were able to take, toys that we'll pull out sometimes, and yeah, it's really nice.
Thanks for sharing. I guess so we've kind of talked about like our home communities and like kind of what that looked like and a little bit of like our school experiences. I was wondering if you could talk about maybe how that might have shifted if you once you like moved to college or like kind of moved into like different kind of spheres of like people you're like working with or communicating with, or things like that. I guess, Lina, would you like to start off with that?
Sure. I think there was a lot of shift. We went to different colleges, so that was kind of the first time we were separate from each other, and to even, to have that commonality of like someone else has kind of gone through, an experience that is similar, of course, perceived differently and all of that kind of stuff, but that community, like commonality of, growing up in our household and all of that stuff. And I think that, so that's been a little bit interesting to kind of shift away from that, as well as, obviously COVID-19 had a huge impact on the Asian American community. And so to try, and I think within family, within friend groups, within, number of areas, trying to explain what it's like as the only Asian person in that group, and how it is different when I am walking with my white mother and wearing a mask versus when I'm walking by myself and wearing a mask, and those kind of things. And places that you went to as a child that never even occurred to you that your race is going to change how people look at you. And we go to Florida typically every winter for a little bit, and I know the last, since COVID, the last few years, we both have talked about how we don't feel safe wearing masks and being alone in Florida. And so it's a place that we've always gone our whole lives. And so certain things like recognizing and trying to explain your experience and how that is different based on your skin tone is, like, I think a hard thing, especially within family structures and extended family, but then also occurs in friend groups and other things like that make it complicated.
Let's see, I'm gonna call MeMe, I guess, to add to that question if you'd like. MeMe, would you like to, I guess, talk about, I know we talked about like with, especially you're moving from like private to public school or like things like that, kind of how that also kind of shaped, your idea of community and how that changed.
Yeah, so I think Mia, you and I had kind of the opposite experience, that you went from a public school to a private university, and I went from a public school to a state university.
Stop talking.
And I think for me, that was a huge eye-opening experience, because it was a time of, coming into my own, forming my own identity. And it's when I really met a lot of diversity. It was the first time that I really like met a lot of people from different countries.
Yeah, okay, just stop talking, please.
Non-Caucasian races.
No.
Which was really just a lot to learn about myself. So that's when I started, I think, recognizing more that, I knew I wasn't white, but I realized that there's like a cultural identity outside of being white. And I don't mean to get too much
the mute button.
Identity question, but
wait, the mute button.
Sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. What was I
No,
saying?
it's okay. Yeah, we were talking about going to public school, I guess, and like in university, and then kind of how community shifted, idea of community shifted between the two, like
Yes.
growing up and then afterwards.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out what my community really meant to me, and I'm still kind of figuring that out. But I think, and not to get too much in the whole identity thing, but that was just a big awakening for me, and it brought up a lot of questioning for sure. But I think it's been very good for me to, of course, broaden my horizons and meet that kind of diversity, but also to better understand myself as well.
I think I can also speak to that a little bit. I think growing up, like where I there was kind of a larger Chinese community to like a public school or private school where there was more of a, I'd say it was less diverse kind of community. I feel like that's where I really began to like question kind of like my sense of belonging, and like I think that was like I kind of took my work and my research as kind of the avenue for like trying to find that community. And so for kind of context, my degree, like in undergrad and kind of moving forward, was like related to like public history and like working with like local community, and kind of helping to preserve those communities and like what they like their stories and things like that. Um, and so even though that wasn't specifically like Asian or like Chinese or like that side of my identity, it felt like it was like my way of like trying to figure out like what community meant to me. And I think like coming here to DC and connecting with the 1882 Foundation, where the mission is like very specifically surrounding like Chinese American experiences, that's been really fruitful for me, I think, because it's required me to do like a lot of research, of course, about like Chinese Americans and immigration. And I think it kind of helped me like think about how like a lot of the experiences between, I guess, Chinese adoptees and like, you know, immigration is like, of course, very similar. It's just like they're framed in different ways sometimes. And oftentimes, like, I feel like adoptees aren't always like viewed as part of the conversation. Sometimes it becomes like Chinese American experience. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on to our next kind of section, which is on language and culture, which I think we touched on a little bit about kind of how we like connect with like Chinese American experiences. Like I know you both kind of mentioned joining like different festivities and like joining like different kind of cultural parts of it. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to like, your experiences with that. Ren, would you like to start this time?
Sure. Yeah, besides our parents doing a good job of kind of scoping the area out constantly for events, and even just downtown DC at the different malls, the Hirshhorn. I, in high school, was able to start learning Mandarin. I kept that up for a bit. It is a bit challenging. I think part of me thinks it's because of being like as an adoptee, I had trouble with, you know, the language transition. So foreign languages is actually hard for me. So I do know a little bit of Mandarin, but that's kind of all I was able to get to at the moment. But immersion for me has always been the best way. So I've always wanted to kind of immerse myself with the culture. So I've lived in China now for a year total, half a semester, or one semester back in high school, and then once I graduated for a semester about. But I've been back multiple times, and I still want to learn the language, just maybe not the traditional way. That's a bit challenging for me, but
Yeah, language is hard, especially I grew up, or I tried to learn French. I did a French major in undergrad, and I don't remember much of it anymore. But it's really hard to do that, to learn another language and then keep it up, especially we don't have that built-in community to practice and everything like that. So I definitely resonate with that. Lina, would you like to kind of speak to your experiences?
Yeah, well, so one of my moms actually took Mandarin lessons before she went to China, which is really cool. And we would go to like Saturday Chinese school, which is like an interesting experience because most kids are like in Chinese families, and so you really stick out. And like you can also tell that like they're at home getting reinforced in their house in a way that, you know, it was not there. And like this teaching style is very different too, just culturally. And then we also were in private school and like a very like hands-on learning school. And so to have to just, you know, that didn't last super long for either of us. We were like, please don't make us go to Chinese school. And my parents, you know, obliged. But they did a really good job of, you know, when we were younger, we always celebrated the Lunar New Year, and they would always decorations. We would always celebrate the Moon Festival. We still do. And so there are certain, you know, festivals and celebrations that my parents made a point of being aware of. They also did a really, really good job of children's books. You know, we grew up in the 90s, and I think there was maybe one book that had a white family in it. And so that was really special as well, to be able to see ourselves in the books and have that part. But I don't speak Mandarin. I did take it for 3 years in high school and cannot tell you much. But
Another thing I want to add that our parents did was apparently with those books, they changed all the genders to
oh
females.
yes,
Um,
that's the feminist side of things.
we did later on, we were looking at the books and we are like, wait, we don't remember this being a male.
Yeah,
So they did little things like that, just that we only learned about later that I thought was really interesting and cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. Mimi, would you like to go next in sharing kind of your connection to Chinese American language, culture type thing?
So my mom had offered for me, I guess, to go to Chinese school and learn the language, but unfortunately I was a little kid and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. That's, extra school and extra work, but I really wish I had, because now that I'm an adult and I have met more people who are either Chinese having recently immigrated here or they're Chinese American, they're like, yeah, there is a community here where you could, learn more about the culture, but apparently most of the, I guess, sessions are conducted not in English and Chinese. So I'm like, well, I can't really participate in that. So I think that's a little disappointing to me, but I've tried to find my own ways of connecting. There's a friend of mine in my med school class is Chinese American, and we've talked about culture a little bit. And I've made friends with an international medical graduate who'll be coming here for her residency, and she's from China. So we talk about these things, and that's a way for me to connect and kind of find out what I can. I was going to do a study abroad in Taiwan actually for med school, but COVID totally killed those plans. So in my own ways, I think I've tried to do research, but a lot of it's had to have been research. I just don't feel, unfortunately, I've had as much opportunity for real life connections, but I've been working on it. I went to Hawaii actually a few months ago, and I went to Chinatown, Hawaii, and that was a very interesting experience because honestly, I think that's one of my few experiences where I've actually been around people, like mainly people who look, like I do, and a lot of them were like, "Oh, are you from here? Are you Chinese, Japanese, etc." And so we talked a little bit about adoption and things like that. So I'm working on it, but it's an evolving experience for sure. You're muted.
I'm gonna move on to our next section now for sake of time, which is on identity and intersectionality, which I know we've kind of touched on these topics a lot, kind of across our conversation. But I just want to have like another kind of gathering ideation of like what your experiences are like with that. So I think like the first thing I wanted to kind of go over was kind of like how do you personally navigate kind of these intersections of being like Asian and American, and like what does that kind of look like to you, like whether that be something more concrete or more like, I don't know, like kind of up in the ether, I guess. Let's see, do you want to start, Lina?
Sure. I think that it kind of depends on where you are. Like in the world, when I walk around, people just see me as Asian, right? In my family, extended family as well, like I think that there's a level of I'm just Lina, and maybe we don't understand what that means, that like I look different and like what that carries in this world and how the world looks at us differently based on that. And I think that in circles, in school, you get put in a lot of affinity groups, and I did a lot of diversity work later in my time. And when you're put in the Asian American group, you don't really relate on, that sense of things because you didn't grow up with Asian American parents, and a lot of or they can be immigrants, and that's a whole nother cultural aspect. And so not kind of feeling in there, you go into the adoption group, and then they don't have two moms, or there's just a lot of different groups that you can go into that make you feel like, while I have some overlap, there's quite a lot of difference. And I think something about intersectionality that's important to remember is that you can't really separate them. They don't really separate in these easy, nice categorized boxes. And so I think there's an article that just came out in the New Yorker, which I still have not read yet, but there's this one line that I think is important for identity purposes for adoptees, regardless of how you became an adoptee, is that to be an adoptee, you have to lose your whole family first. And so I think that kind of sets the tone. And not only is that happening, but it's happening when you are an infant or a child. And so that's quite a lot to handle with your identity.
And Ren, I don't, not to call you out, but I know we have this beautiful piece here from you, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like your work as an artist and maybe how that kind of impacts like your your thoughts about like identity and stuff like that.
For sure. I definitely felt like I struggled a lot. I, unlike Lena, found a lot of comfort in adoptee groups. So I was always partaking in ones. There was one that was specifically for kids with LGBTQ parents that I met with regularly, one with just Asian adoptees, others just Chinese female adoptees. There's just various mixtures. I just always seeked them out because I wasn't really good at talking myself, but I was better at listening to other people's and taking bits of theirs and thinking, oh, I can relate to that, or I can relate to this. So a lot of times I would speak through my artwork. I'm an art major, so I guess that's not too much of a surprise that a lot of topics that are near and dear or that I struggle with, I put onto paper in some way or another. So the piece I brought here, I did a couple years ago for a year-long program at the University of Maryland. And the whole theme was adoption related, but I thought this one was the best to describe kind of growing up. I call it self-portrait, just very simple, but it has my name in Chinese characters because my parents decided to keep that name. But now I go by Ren, so it's kind of a change from Yang Ren Si. But it's still behind that name, it holds so much because a lot of times if a Chinese adoptee's name incorporates the town that they were from, so that's where the Yang is from, is Yangzhou. So I have Yang, and then they come up with a name. But so in the black writing is in calligraphy. I wrote, "What is your name?" And over again. So it's kind of it's a common question, but it's even a question like that when I was younger would just get my mind spiraling into like, who am I? You know, what is my name? I know the name that the orphanage gave me, but I don't know if the name my birth parents gave me, if they gave me one, you know. So that piece is comprised of English and Chinese, half and half. If you look closely, the red is either echoing or answering questions. So it has, for example, in Chinese, I wrote mama, baba, which is mother, father. And then in English, I wrote mother, mother, because I have two moms. So it's kind of this balancing between these two identities and trying to find kind of a calm between the two eventually, you know, a balance.
Well, and I think you touched on something that is different for us that that is important to mention is that our parents did keep our names that we came with from China, and I actually I have yet to meet a Chinese adoptee whose adopted parents did not change it, and I think that is special, and they kept our surnames as well in our legal name as well, and so that's something that at least for me I'm grateful for.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, personally, my name was, I don't even know if I really know what my Chinese name was, but yeah, my name was also changed when I was adopted. Mimi, I'm gonna give you the floor to talk about identity and intersectionality, and then after that, we'll move into some time for some audience questions. So yeah, go ahead, Mimi.
Yeah, so identity, intersectionality, that's something that I've always been a curious person. I've always known that I'm adopted and I'm from China. So it's something I've always been seeking out information on, but what it means to be Asian, to be Chinese, like that's something I've really worked on understanding over the past few years, especially. And I would say the way I describe it for myself is diversity, both of course, broadly speaking, but also uniquely. And that my family is white, but I don't think that our family fits into the dominant white culture here in Alabama. But then also, like I said, I don't unfortunately have a strong connection to my Chinese identity. So the way that I would describe myself is honestly just American, because I think, you know, we're all immigrants here. We all have unique personal histories that make up this country. And I think that's something really to be valued. And we just don't fit into specific boxes, whether you pick, you know, Asian, white, Chinese American, like we're just not a box. So that's what I call my identity right now.
Yeah, I feel like I resonate a lot with that too. I think personally also moving here, I feel like I feel a lot more Southern than when I was in Alabama. So I feel like even though I don't have a very strong accent, I get asked about that a lot. But yeah, I think that it's something that has definitely, I don't know, it's definitely in flux for me and something that I'm still figuring out as far as what parts of myself do I feel is like more comfortable. And I think like especially working with 1882 Foundation, I've become a bit more in touch with like how I like kind of connect with like Chinese like identity and things like that, even though like some of my experiences aren't exactly the same in alignment. But yeah. All right, I'm gonna open the floor to Q&A. Gabby, if there are any in the chat, please feel free to call them out. And then if anyone in the audience here would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand or just have at it.
Want to talk about these resources a little bit too?
Sure. So we kind of, as we were kind of talking about this panel, we wanted to pull together some resources just to share with you all in case you're interested in learning more about like adoption experiences. So first of all, we have this table up here of all these books that Ren brought as well as their artwork. So feel free after the program to go up and kind of take a look at it. And then on the screen here, we have a couple of things that both some of our panel has been involved in, as well as just some kind of projects that we like. So with When We Become Ours, MeMe actually wrote a piece for that, and it's coming out in, is it October?
Yes.
Yeah. That'll be coming out in October, and it's like an anthology of, I'm guessing, is it Chinese adoptee experiences?
Yeah, it's an anthology about adopted characters by adopted authors. So it's kind of just the idea of like, I think you guys have touched on this, but a lot of times I think adoptees, we get talked about, but we don't often get to talk ourselves. So it's kind of the idea of, reclaiming our narratives and then getting to, express what might be important to us. And for me in this story, just as a disclaimer, being a part of the adoptee group, like I said, I kind of realized that it can be a lot of joy, but a lot of hurt there, a lot of trauma. So I kind of explore, I guess, both sides of the coin in this story. So I'm excited for when it eventually comes out to share with you guys.
Yeah, I'm also really excited to get to read it finally, because MeMe and I have talked through our childhood about, she's always been an aspiring writer, and so I'm excited to see this piece published in here.
Thanks. Yeah, I was a creative writer who went to med school. So
my name is Shu Wong. Can you hear me? I'm from Albuquerque. Great. I just want to mention I adopted my daughter in 1994 from the Guangxi province. Couple of things. Over the years, or at least in the beginning, adoption, I guess, might be a question within United States. But the word that I was given that Chinese adoptees were concerned about was abandonment, which is what you sort of talked about earlier, that you lost your family and the entire topic of abandonment. Why was I abandoned? And not knowing, about the one-child policy. The other thing that I would just like to mention is that in the essay that I had to write to the Chinese government, I had to guarantee that my daughter would go to college, which I think reflects the value that Chinese have about education. So my daughter is now a marine biologist. She's working for the Florida Aquarium. Again, somebody mentioned, she's not really happy about living in Florida, but again, she wants to do coral restoration. So this is something that she has been very lucky and very happy to have this position. There are other things that I can bring up, but I have enjoyed this conversation a lot. And I guess just to say that all of you have done well. And you have all, I think I mentioned to my daughter, why were you selected? Because you know that you were very lucky to be adopted from China. So I'm just going to say that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
This is Carolyn Chan, also from Albuquerque, and I am the mother of two adoptees, but not from China. But one of my children is part Chinese and part Native American. And he was a little concerned about that being biracial, and that I'm an older lady. I'm 86 years old, so my son will be 60 years old in a month. And anyway, we reached out to, because of my experience growing up in the South also, I can understand how some of you who grew up in Alabama might feel. And you might also detect my Southern accent, which I had never been able to get rid of. But the point that I want to make is that we here in Albuquerque did reach out to the families with children from China to try to help provide from the Chinese American Citizens Alliance Albuquerque chapter some experience with the cultural aspects of festivals and community here in Albuquerque. And we are friends with a lot of the people here in Albuquerque who have adopted children from China. And we've been able to, through some teachers, and one of them is my daughter, who is now a practicing optometrist who has 2 children of her own who are teenagers. And we were very happy to provide a connection from the community with the adoptees from China. And it's been great experience because we have learned from each other, and we have maintained friendships with a lot of the children from over many years. It's almost a generation now. And I really do appreciate your stories. You've done a great job of telling them. And you're a wonderful asset to our country here in America. And it's great that you consider yourselves American. And we understand how you feel, because even though I was born and raised in Mississippi, my great-grandfather came from China back in the 1880s, we still have this problem of identity and how people perceive us. But I'm really grateful to you for sharing your stories with us today.
Thank you for your comments, Carolyn. I think we're we're past 3 o'clock now. So for sake of time, I want to make sure we talk about class resources, and then I think we'll close the program with, I think Ted's going to say a few words, who's our executive director. But for this last slide, both Mimi and I were both participants on the Adopted Babies from China podcast, so you can check out that. It was organized by, or is made by this woman named Tara, who's also adopted, but she has done a lot of conversations with Chinese adoptees. So feel free to check out that. And then I also did a couple of oral histories as part of my one of my projects with American University when I was in graduate school. So you can check out those as well. But yeah, I'm gonna let Ted, would you like to close us out with a couple of your words, or?
Yeah, I'd hate to sort of interrupt people who want to say things. In the past, what we've done with our talk stories is that we are finished at the hour, but then we open up because we think it's really important for us to socialize here. So please hang around if you want to, and meet the women here, plus understand what's going on and exchange ideas among yourself. I appreciate the fact that a lot of people are a little bit shy, and this is the opportunity to sort of like get together and exchange things. But then as we are working on the sort of guys from the Zoom, hi Carolyn and Sue and everyone. But we've also in the past just sort of opened up the Zoom link so everybody can unmic themselves, and then sort of for half an hour just sort of hang around, right? So then you just blurt out stuff if you want, or just use the chat. If you want to do that, that's okay too. But so maybe for another half hour, we just open up and you guys just sort of like make yourself known, show your face, say hello to each other across the Zoom lines and so forth. I do want to say this as sort of a closing. I want to thank thank you all for coming, those in the Zoom and those here. Also, Mia and Ren and Lina and Mimi in the back. So be sure to look up their books. They're wonderful stuff, I think. We'll see, right?
I hope so.
But whatever that narrative is going to be, it's something that's unique for your own voices. I think Stan covers things very well when we say that our goal on these talk stories is that we want to strengthen our sense of community. And that sense of community comes from us just coming together, either on physically here or on Zoom, or things where we can just share our stories. And that's an important thing. We share our stories, our own voices, and that remembering of our stories and sharing that is what makes our community strong and keeps us alive, regardless of where we are. So shout out to all those guys in Mississippi and Arizona and all this other stuff, but also here. I do want to thank Gabby. She's sitting in the back doing all that stuff. Terry is always there for us, and he's very thankful. So in a short while, and I want to say Jeff, right? So Brandon and all these ladies here, right? Right thing. Yes, okay, absolutely, especially. Yes. If you have a chance, talk to Lauren. She's there just being quiet, but she's got some great programs being put into our 1882 website, and she's been working that for a couple of years with her team. And so learn about that. The other thing is that our program's coming up. I know I said I was going to give you guys time to chat, but I just want to say that tomorrow we actually have another program. That program will be at the Georgetown Law School over here. And that's going to be about, that's going to be a community discussion, a discussion among community leaders from DC and Philadelphia. And we'll be talking about the impact of the sports arena being proposed at Philadelphia and how what we can learn from the sports arena that was built here in DC. So it's going to be talking about the gentrification process, but it'll be specifically looking at the Philadelphia, what's happening in Philadelphia. So please come contribute your thoughts to that, give some insights to what Philadelphia can expect, and also give your thoughts about what is happening here in DC. It should be noticed that the downtown bid is actually thinking about redeveloping all of the downtown bid area, which includes Chinatown. So you might want to have a sense of what's going on in terms of physical reconstruction of this place and some of the policies that they have. I think Mayor Bowser wants to increase the density of people in this area and the commercial density as well as people density. That's something will have a tremendous impact on the way that Chinatown continues to be staying as Chinatown, right? And how do we want to shape it? Now, the other thing is on Saturday, that following week, 21st, right?
That's on Friday.
Friday.
Yes.
21st on Friday at American University. Be sure to go over there. There's going to be a great food festival, right? And we will have a table there. I don't think we're showing food though. We're actually going to be having books.
We're just
So
tabling.
food for minds, right? So be sure to go over there and learn about our community, which is not just Chinese, but also our entire American community here. Again, there are so many things coming up. We're going to have, just to keep you guys keep in mind that we're going to have our APA Heritage Month is coming in May, and there's all kinds of things happening there. We have a conference on urban Chinatowns, or called Urban Chinatowns of Plain Sites. That's going to be done with the art from a art of urban planners perspectives. That's going to complement another conference we're planning for the fall or maybe June 2024, and that's going to be about rural Chinatowns. So often we talk about Chinatowns and we think about New York, we're thinking about Seattle, we're talking about San Francisco, Mott Street, and so forth. But what about those urban Chinatowns? Those little guys that is back where Carolyn lives in Greensville, but also in Hanford, Fresno, Sacramento, places like that. And we're looking at, that's going to be called Rural Chinatowns of Buried Sites. That's going to be mostly from a archaeologist's perspective, which reminds me also that another project that's coming in that we expect to be completed probably in this year is that selection of the Summit Tunnel at near Lake Tahoe, which is part of the Transcontinental Railroad. We hope that that's going to be selected as National Historic Monument. Please write to your congressman and tell him to get with it and get it done. And then the other thing that will be happening is that this year is the 80th anniversary of the Magnuson Act, which is the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so that's December 17th. This is a special year for us. So December 17th, which is the date in which the anniversary occur, we will have a big event, which is usually our annual fundraiser, but we'll have some kind of a nice event at that time. This is also the 125th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision on Wong Kim Ark, which is the decision that affirmed birthright citizenship for, at that time, Chinese, but all Americans, all people. And so there's a lot of these things going on. I hope that you guys stay with us, do things. It's always great to see you here and bring in new friends and so forth. And so there's a lot of things that we can do. We always take in volunteers. And you guys, of course, are going to be part of our Chinese American Women in History Conference and so forth. So again, thank you all. Please hang around, maybe if you're in the Zoom and you want to shout out, literally shout out, then we can see what's going on. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.